Hey, welcome if you're joining us. We're just giving a few minutes for people to click into the Zoom. So just give us a few, just like one more minute while we wait for people to click on. All right, I think we'll go ahead and kick it off, and if
Hi.
more people join while we're going, that's great. It's going to be a crazy news week. Welcome. My name is Heather Long. I'm an economics reporter and correspondent at the Washington Post, and really thrilled to be joined today with some rock stars from NPR, from CNN, and from the Wall Street Journal. So we're hoping to give you all some insight on how we got started in our careers in journalism and some tips about how you can hopefully get a great summer internship or first work experience in the field. You may notice that a bunch of us have a lot to do with what's known as business or economic journalism. We are doing this as part of SABU. It's the Society for Advancing Business Editing and Writing. That's a nonprofit journalism group that has over 3,000 members that cover companies and stocks and the economy and inequality and money. And there's just so much, almost any story touches money some way. And so we hope that this exposes you a little bit to what business journalism is as well. Many of us didn't start out thinking we would be business journalists, but we've realized it's a really amazing part of journalism, and it happens to be growing, and there happens to be a lot of great paid internships in business journalism. So we hope you'll give it a look. And lastly, we have a couple of questions for each other that we'll start off with, but then we'd love to hear from you. Please feel free to put some questions in the Zoom chat box, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. We really want to be helpful to you after we give some kind of broad opening advice and statements. So with that, I think we'll kick it off by having each of us just describe briefly, kind of in like 2 minutes, our career trajectories. Kind of, were you someone who did journalism in college and then went right into the field? Sort of tell us a little bit about how you are where you are today. And maybe we'll go Matt Egan from CNN first, and then Stacey Vanek Smith, who's the host of NPR's awesome show, The Indicator, and then Aisha Al Muslim, who's the head of newsroom internships at the Wall Street Journal. Matt?
Yeah, thank you, Heather, for doing this, and thanks for inviting me. Heather used to be my editor back in the day, so it's great to see all of her success. But so I'm a reporter at CNN. I've been here for about 7 years now. I started. I mean, I've always been interested in journalism, like, I mean, going back to like grammar school, middle school, high school. I wrote in college at the College of New Jersey, and I started off at a newspaper. I was a general assignment newspaper reporter for the Trenton Times, and I did that for just a few months, but I loved it. It was a great way to really learn about like foundational journalism. And then I was a business reporter at Fox Business, writing for the website there. And then I got to CNN when Heather hired me. And I was at the time it was CNN Money. So wrote a lot about the economy and markets, investing and companies. I should have pointed out, though, that I didn't always know that I was going to get into business. I mean, when I was in college, I didn't really have an interest in business. I thought I wanted to do politics, but I ended up giving it a shot and really loving it. I mean, I love the numbers, the fact that you can, the numbers really help to tell a story. There's so many different interesting trends. And so I've stuck with it, and I would definitely encourage everyone to give business a shot, because it really just affects so much, including politics, of course. Yeah, thank you. Thanks again, Heather.
Hey, Matt, one follow-up. Did you have an internship at the Trenton Times, or kind of how did that lead to that first start?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I actually, I did have an internship. I think it was, so I did some interning in college in the summers and then at different papers. And then at the Trenton Times, I was actually a freelancer, which was a great experience because I was getting paid for it. But I was also learning and getting college credit. So that the freelance work ended up turning into like a full-time offer when I graduated from college.
Hey, Stacey, thanks for joining us from your car.
Hey, I am so sorry. I was on a many hours delayed flight. And so I am in an enterprise car rental, but I do have my car, and I purchased a California t-shirt. Anyway, I had plans to look much nicer than this. I'm really excited to be here, but I'm so thrilled that I was able to join. I'm really thrilled to be here. Heather, you're an amazing person and a wonderful aggregator of people. Yeah, I came into business journalism in kind of a funny way. I wanted to be a journalist. I thought I wanted to be an arts journalist, actually. I had started out, I did an internship at my local paper, the Idaho Statesman, and I really loved it. I knew I wanted to do journalism, but I really thought I wanted to cover the arts and culture. I went to journalism school. I went to Columbia Journalism School, and I knew that I wanted to do radio. I took a radio class and I really loved it. And the job that I was able to get was an entry-level production. It's called a production assistant job in the middle of the night for the morning show. And I got it at Marketplace, which was a business show, and it was hiring. That was why I took the job. And I knew nothing about business when I started. And I really fell in love with it. It's so dynamic. It's so amazing. It ties into everything. I realized I could cover arts and culture. And it's just been such a wonderful field. I've completely become a convert to economics. I remember the first story I covered still, which was snow machines in malls. I was in Los Angeles. And it's really been just such a wonderful career. And I think business journalism, more than anything else, gives you a lot of freedom. And I think that's what I never understood. I think I sort of thought of business journalism as only the markets, and it's absolutely not that. There's so much emotion in business journalism. There's so much of our lives, our everyday lives, are wrapped up in economics and business. And it's just been such a wonderful career. After Marketplace, I was there for 11 years, actually. I became a reporter. And then eventually I went over to Planet Money, NPR's Planet Money podcast, which is long form. So I was doing longer pieces. And then a few years ago, helped them, Planet Money, launch the Daily Indicator podcast, which is daily news. So I've done a lot of different kinds of business coverage, but it's really been wonderful. And yeah, people ask me all the time if I would consider changing beats, and I would never change beats. I love business and economics. So I really think it's a wonderful field.
So and Stacey, have you always been interested in radio? Has that always been your calling?
That's a great question. I started out in print because that's just what I knew. I had an internship at the high school paper. I was writing for Boise Weekly for a little bit, and it was in journalism school. I just took a radio class to try it and really loved it. So I did start out in print.
And Aisha, we're so glad to have you. You actually are running internships right now, and
Yes.
would love to hear how you ended up in this role.
Yeah, so answering your question as to like when journalism, for me, it was back in the 7th grade. So I'm originally from Panama. So I came to this country when I was about 11 years old. And I started the 6th grade here. So by the 7th grade, I had a journalism class, and we had a school newspaper in our middle school. And I fell in love with journalism. Back then, I thought I wanted to be an entertainment reporter. Then quickly realized I don't know most of these celebrities' names. So that went out the window. Eventually, I continued down my journalism path, though. I attended the Edward R. Murrow High School in Brooklyn. Then I went on to Lehman College, which is the City University of New York. I went to the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism. My first job out of school was at the Queen's Courier, where I also ran their Spanish language newspaper. So I was an editor and a reporter, so I had a dual role. And then I joined Newsday, where I became a town reporter. And I was actually at Newsday for 7 years. So half of that time I was a town reporter, and the other half I became a business reporter covering retail and small businesses. And that was the first time that I had honestly even thought about business. It just so happened they needed someone on the business desk. They thought I probably would be a good candidate. I had written about retail and small businesses and not even realized that I had. And being an internal candidate made that transition a lot easier, since I wasn't a business reporter before that. My editor was happy. He took me on eventually. So that turned out well. And yeah, just following that business reporting career path led me to the Wall Street Journal, where I was a breaking business news reporter initially. And then I became a bankruptcy reporter. That was actually my last position. And now I'm the senior editor for Newsroom Internships. I started this job at the end of May. So this is the first time I've done something else other than reporting. I've been a reporter for most of my life at this point. So, but it's great. It's a great opportunity to be able to see all the potential talent and hopefully help them land at the journal. And I've always been like a mentor and a mentee and all of that. And so this is like a great role to be able to do a little bit of all of that.
Wow, what a neat career path. I guess, obviously a lot of people who are tuning in are hoping to maybe get some insights as they hopefully finish their internship applications. Many of the big applications are due in October or November coming up. I know the Washington Post is October 6th. Aisha, can you say a little bit about kind of Wall Street Journal and the different internships available in your newsroom?
Yeah, so for us, our application for the summer is going to be November 1st. So that can be from reporting to graphics to video to podcast to product design. We're adding photography editing also to the slate of internships we already have posted. There's social media. I mean, there's a little bit of everything. It's certainly right now there's 13 types of reporting internships that have been posted. And we most of the internships will be in New York. However, we do have bureaus in DC, in LA, San Francisco, Houston, Chicago. So depending on the position, some of the interns may be able to work out of those bureaus as well. We're going under the assumption right now that hopefully next year will be in person. We'll see whether that will be the case or not. Something else I want to add is that we recently created a part-time spring internship, but that one is very specific to students that live or go to school in the New York City, the New York metropolitan area or the DC metropolitan area. It's the first time that we're doing that. We will have likely about 6 part-time interns. All of our internships are paid. So just like the summer internship is $900 per week, which is full-time. The part-time spring internship, it ends up being a little less than $26 an hour, with the expectation of working anywhere from 16 to 20 hours a week for a 15-week period, as opposed to the summer, which is 10 weeks. But that one is full-time, so you get a lot of experience. So between the two, it's over 300 hours of internship experience that you will get. Another thing about our internship program is that not only can you get hands-on experience, you also will get training. So we do provide our interns different types of training, even if it's just like the basics of video or podcasting, just so they're familiar with it, as well as, how to get scoops. And you get to learn from some of our great reporters about how to get that scoop and that story. And also we pair every intern with a mentor. And this is a mentor, someone from the newsroom who has volunteered to be a mentor to an intern. So, I mean, they're really helpful to make connections, help with story ideas, career paths. all those things. So that's also something else on top of the hands-on experience.
Yeah, I wanted to brainstorm with all three of you for a minute about, some tips on how to stand out in an application. And I don't know, one of the things that I always tell people from my days of, looking for awesome people like Matt to when I was an editor was, just often so much, almost all of our days usually start with some sort of news meeting where you're pitching ideas to, your editors or the producers or whomever. And so I always tell applicants, whether for internships or jobs, be an ideas person, even in your cover letter. Don't be afraid to pitch like, hey, this is a big week. There's a lot happening. I would love to do this story or that story, showing people from the get-go that you're engaged. I think often people spend a lot of time talking about their past. Like, I did this, in my college paper or my high school paper, and that's good. You want to say a little bit about what you've done. But I think so much is like showing people that you can be a player from day one, that you want to be writing. You want to raise your hand and say, I want to write the story tomorrow, or I want to go produce this radio clip tomorrow. So anyway, yeah, maybe we can go around again. And, Matt, maybe you can give some insights on, what your day-to-day looks like and how somebody could really hit the ground running.
Yeah, well, that's great advice from you, Heather. Yeah, I mean, I would say I read a ton, reading just what other media outlets are covering, what we're covering, but also a lot of research reports from economics groups from, Wall Street banks about what's happening in the economy, what's happening in the market, the latest business trends. So definitely a lot of reading. And I'm usually pretty early in the morning. I'm trying to have a good idea of what it is that I'm going to cover, and how I want to cover it, and explaining to my editors and producers, why it's important. There's like a lot of communication with editors and TV producers, really throughout the day. And then I'm actually calling experts, whether it's economists or analysts or real people, business owners, to talk about whatever that is. For example, today I was writing about natural gas prices, which have gone way up. I don't usually write about natural gas, but it's a big deal because that's how people heat their homes. And so I was on the phone with experts talking to me about why natural gas prices have gone up, what that means to people, and I'm writing a story and then trying to figure out how to cover that on television. Also, because television is obviously very visual. Coming up with ideas for charts and other elements, including maybe video clips or full screen quotes on how to present the story. And as far as like advice to people when they're applying for internships or jobs or whatever it is, I think it's really important to just make sure you know your audience. Because obviously if you're interested in business journalism and you're applying to maybe CNBC or Fox Business or Bloomberg, where the audience is a little bit more investor focused, that might be different from CNN or ABC News or somewhere else that it's a little bit more consumer focused. So I think it's really important to know who the audience is. But whoever it is, you got to be able to like explain the stories that you're pitching about why these stories matter to whoever the audience is. And it could be multiple audiences. And I just think it's really important to like drive home the point about why various trends in the economy or politics or whatever it is, why ultimately the reader or the viewer or the listener should actually care. So I think that would be something really important to focus on. And one other point, when you're applying, whatever the medium is, I also think it's really important to show and to demonstrate that that you can write, because no matter what, you're still writing. I mean, I write articles for the website, but I'm also going on television, but I'm still writing TV scripts or writing the news that comes out and sending it out via email internally. So I think that like being a really good writer and someone who's willing to try to get better at writing is really important.
And hopefully everyone can see us nodding vigorously when Matt was describing how important it is, A, to be a writer, but B, to, to really sell why what you're pitching is important. It sounds so basic, but there's definitely those moments we've all had where we pitch a story and it's like, you don't understand how important this is. Hey, Stacey, what about for you in the world of audio? Can you talk us through a little bit about your typical day and ways that people can stand out on the audio side? Like, do you have to have an audio clip to apply for an internship?
You definitely don't, actually. And I would say the most important thing in an application, at least, because a lot of times people will apply to a lot of internships, specifically at NPR, but just a lot of internships. I mean, I did it myself when I was applying to internships. So, which is exactly what you're supposed to do, but you do want it to seem like this is the one place you want to go. So I think it's one thing that I think really always makes letters stand out is if people reference something that you have covered recently. Like, I really enjoyed your piece on XYZ because of this. I really loved your piece about oil, natural gas prices. I loved the woman from Oklahoma talking about, her concerns about heating her home. Because when you're reading through applications, we all have egos. So it's like, oh, well, thank you. But also, that the person's familiar with the show. And that is something that can happen. Sometimes people will come to an internship interview and you get a feeling that they aren't familiar with the show or the publication, or they don't know your work. And that makes it feel like a little bit more of a long shot. So if you know that someone knows the show, or you get the feeling that they do, that can be really powerful. And I think it also helps so much with pitching, because you can see what sorts of stories you should pitch. If you listen to, let's say, you read a couple of weeks of like business coverage at a publication, or listen to a couple weeks of shows, you can get a pretty good sense of the issues that they're covering, the issues that they're interested in. And yes, just like Matt said, the why it's interesting is so crucial, and it's so easy to forget. Alex Bloomberg, who founded Planet Money, used to insist that pitches be structured with, I would like to pitch a story about X, and it is interesting because Y. And it is amazing sometimes how hard it is to explain the why part, because you're just like, no, but this is just important. Like, it's just, it's important. But I think there's a little bit of a sell that you have to do, especially at first, because people don't know your work. They don't know what you're capable of or not. And the only thing I would add to that is, especially when you're starting out and pitching things, to maybe start a little smaller. Sometimes I might shy away from huge stories like, interest rates, or bigger pieces about the stock market, and focus on something a little smaller, maybe that other people are missing. We've had a couple interns really blow us away by pitching either international stories that we hadn't covered, or sectors that we hadn't covered very well, or even talking about ideas for social media. And it just felt very exciting, like they were going to bring something to the team that wasn't there, fresh ideas, a fresh perspective. And that just made them very exciting candidates. Felt like they knew the show, they could really bring something to the show, they could be a real contributor.
Aisha, how about you? Obviously, you've been an editor. Now you're doing this internship role. What are you telling people for ways they can really stand out this season?
Yeah, so I echo what Matt and Stacey said. I couldn't have said it better myself. Like, all those tips that you gave are great ones, like seriously. So as I'm like looking at applications, one of the things that, the resume, it's the standard one, but it's the cover letter that really is going to make you different, right? So I want to learn more about you beyond the resume. Okay, so that means don't just repeat what I could read in the resume. Tell me more about who you are, what makes you you and different from other people. Like Stacey mentioned, like if you worked on a story that you're really proud of, tell me about that story. Tell me what you did about it. What was the impact? What was come about it? That's another way to stand out. If you had any like transferable skills that, maybe you worked at a McDonald's or something, but you picked up some type of skill from working at that job that could really help in journalism as a journalist, talk about that in your cover letter. Don't put it in your resume, but talk about that in your cover letter. those are things that will make you stand out and different from other people. And then just in general, even when you're applying, the more you include clips and things like that, especially if they were your story idea, something that you executed, because that allows you to then talk about that story as a story, right? You have something more to share. Obviously, if you want an award for something or something like that, you can also include it in the clips. But again, highlighting some of those clips in your cover letter that you're particularly really proud of, if there are any numbers behind it, like it was read by 1 million people, or it got retweeted I don't know how many times, or whatever, that makes it different, right? And it's not just a boilerplate repeating the resume cover letter. And that really is what's going to make you stand out, because at the end of the day, I know I'll be getting thousands of applications, and that will make you stand out. And of course, the other thing that will make you stand out is to actually follow directions. All right, so if you see a job description and it asks for a cover letter, resume, and clips, that you submit a cover letter, resume, and clips. I've gotten so many applications, they just submit a resume, and it clearly tells me you did not bother to read the description, and you're just automatically disqualified from even being considered. So if you really are serious about journalism, you need to learn to read and to follow directions.
Well said, well said. I guess I'm curious, do you anticipate that some of the categories of internships will get fewer applications? Like, is everyone applying for the politics one and maybe not as many people for, I don't know, the visual or design one that's newer? And any, do you think there's any benefit to maybe angling your application to one field or another?
I've gotten these questions before with students, and I tell them the more technical it is, the less likely there'll be applicants. Like the reporting one, like we have a reporting pool, and it could be different beats, but at the end of the day, it's one application. So that one is different. You're gonna get, like, I'm gonna get a ton of reporting ones. But if there's someone who's really interested in podcasting or video or graphics or something like that, that is a lot more technical, the likelihood may increase, but you actually have to have the skills to be able to do it. The journal is certainly a place where you could come and learn more, but we're not going to teach you how to put together a video story. That know already beforehand.
I'll just jump in real quick. And my little story is, I'm one of those people who was not born thinking I wanted to be a journalist. I didn't find journalism until my last semester in college. I had taken an econ journalism course that was offered in the econ department. And as part of that class, we had to submit an op-ed, so an opinion piece. And I submitted it to my hometown newspaper in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and it got published. It was on brain drain in Pennsylvania. And why are all these young people leaving the state? And anyway, I really enjoyed the experience. I got a lot of emails from people about it. And I needed an internship or wanted to do an internship that summer. And I ended up just writing an email to the person who published my op-ed at the Harrisburg paper saying, I don't know if you've ever take interns. I don't see anything on your website about this, but would you be interested in me just being an intern this summer or just hanging out in your newsroom? And it turned out that they had never actually had an intern in the opinion section. They had plenty on the news side, the crime reporters and the sports reporters and the politics, but they gave me a shot. So I would just encourage people. Obviously, we've got a lot of powerhouse news outlets on this call with CNN and NPR and Wall Street Journal and Washington Post. But so many of us, you could hear Matt say Trenton Times, Aisha's story and where she came from. We started at these really local places that really gave us that first chance to build those clips, particularly if you're maybe earlier on in your experience. So don't forget your local news outlets that are in your neighborhood. And don't, hopefully learn from my experience. Don't just wait for the internship application. While the big outlets have these really formal programs that you have to apply for by October or November, I think CNN's is definitely by January. It feels like a college application. A lot of times, some of the local outlets are much more willing to just respond to an email or a phone call, or hopefully, if COVID just subsides, you even showing up in person, kind of knocking on their door a little bit. So, I guess just again, if anybody else has a question for the chat, we're happy to pick that up. But maybe just to kind of round it out, Aisha had mentioned how paid the internship is at the Wall Street Journal, but I'm curious if people would be willing to say, do you make six figures, or kind of, is this a livable wage job? Is this, I know a lot of people are anxious about, should I get into journalism? My parents think I'm going to make no money. So I don't know if people would be willing, you don't have to show an exact number, but kind of a little bit of how salary has gone for you, and any tips. Matt, you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I would say that I think that my parents probably had the same concerns when I got into journalism, but thankfully they didn't talk me out of it. And I mean, I think there are some economic realities here, no matter what medium we're talking about. I mean, a lot of newspapers don't exist. I remember when I started at the Trenton Times, there were there were not that many people there who were working at the newspaper at that point. It was way down from a few years before. So obviously some people had lost their jobs, other people had taken pay cuts. And I think when I got started out of college at the Trenton Times, I wasn't making much money. And I think there were no benefits at first, my first job out of college. And then I had benefits when I was at Fox Business, and I think that I continued to grow salary wise over time, for sure. But not everyone does, and I would say that not everyone is going to be able to progress. So I kind of think you have to come into it like clear-eyed. But I have found that that the places that I've worked, they've rewarded hard work and rewarded talent along the way. I think it helps to sort of broaden your skills as well. Like, the more valuable you can make yourself to the organization, the better. I mean, if you're on radio but you're writing, if you're at a TV network but you're writing and going on TV, and there's podcasts, there's a lot. So I think the more valuable you can make to yourself to the organization, the better. But I would say, in my experience, ultimately, it has been, a livable wage, and I have been able to grow along the way.
I guess I'll go next, talking about salary. So I do remember my very first salary, which was $35,000. This was back in 2004, and I remember being very excited about that and being like, how am I going to spend all this money? Because I had been freelancing for a while. So actually 35,000 was a pretty solid amount of money. I in the really starting out, it was a little bit thin for a while. I will say that I did supplement my income by freelancing, which is a really good question sometimes to ask in entry-level jobs, if you're also able to freelance. I think that can add a lot to not only your experience, but can bring in a little extra money. So that can be good. I would say it depends where you are. I do think journalism can absolutely pay a livable wage. I do now, at this point, 15 years in, make six figures, but it took a long time. I remember the moment that it happened. And there definitely are, nobody goes into journalism for the money, but there's nothing wrong with wanting to make a decent living and support a family or support yourself. And I do think places have sometimes more money than they will let on. So I would, you can always push for more. Often starting out, it's hard when you're getting a first job and things like that. So yeah, in the very beginning, I scrimped a lot and I freelanced in addition to my job. And then later on, the jobs do tend to pay better, and it does get easier when you have some years. But in the beginning, there was a year that I freelanced that I remember I had a $25 minimum in my checking account that I would get very close to sometimes.
Hey, well said. I think Aisha's just getting back on here for a minute. I mean, I'll just share part of the reason I asked the question is we had a call earlier this year, kind of a similar panel, and a lot of people stressed who had worked in other divisions of the newsroom, like Metro or sports or politics, that generally business was paying slightly more, and they found a more steadier way to increase their salary faster. And with business journalism, there's just been a huge growth with like Bloomberg or Reuters. They're not on, but they have like an army of reporters, which is great. So once you have these skills, these abilities to understand economic speak and business speak, it's sort of like what Aisha was saying. It's a technical skill, basically, that a lot of people don't have. A lot of people don't like working with spreadsheets or numbers. And so if you're someone who can do that, it's very valuable. And I certainly found myself, I started in opinion journalism, which is super fun. But as soon as I moved to the business journalism side, that was when I hit six figures a lot. And then, have enjoyed a pretty good pay since. So I would definitely, that's another plug for why it's a great profession if you can be interested in it. Aisha, did you want to make a comment on your experience?
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm having Wi-Fi problems all of a sudden. So yeah, no. So I think about it like this. When I first started, my mom was a home attendant. She made $10 an hour, and just making more than her was like good enough for me at the time. And my first job paid like $30,000. It was not a lot, but I lived at home, and it took me an hour and a half to 2 hours to get to work every day, but I wanted to, and so I stuck out, even though it was obviously low pay. And then I went on to Newsday, and I started making a little bit more money, and then I made the pivot to business journalism. And I ultimately got to the Journal, and well, now I do make more than six figures. And part of it too is getting other job offers. Sometimes that has helped to boost my pay. Sometimes it's sad that it takes that to happen, but it certainly lights a fire under someone if they don't want to lose your talent. So that's helpful. But in general, yeah, business journalism just pays well compared to some of the other journalism beats. And that's also one of the reasons why I had continued, to pursue it, not only for the pay, but to be honest, representation as well. I don't see too many Black or Latinos in business journalism. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to continue. Like I could have easily pivoted back to any other beat, but I thought it was important for that reason for me to stay in business journalism. And of course, now I'm in a place where I could be the one to give an opportunity to someone else. So.
Wow, that's awesome. I guess just to round it out, maybe we'll just go back around the crew one more time and just any closing thoughts and tell people how they can follow your work. What your Twitter handle is and how they can see a little bit more of your work if they want to follow up and learn more about what you and your organization are doing.
Yeah, so you can follow my work on my Twitter handle, Matt Egan CNN, or on my CNN profile page. But I think I would echo what the other panelists said as far as giving business journalism a shot. As far as you making more money in business journalism, I do think that there's some truth to that. Also, depending on your beat, you could actually have more job security, because if the economy is crashing, but you're the only one who could explain it to the world about why it's crashing, it probably gives you some element of job security there. But yeah, I mean, I love business journalism. I like it a lot more than I ever expected. And, you know, I'm constantly trying to find ways to make it relatable to the masses, and to find interesting people to help tell those stories. I think that's one other thing I would emphasize is, you know, as you're potentially, you know, applying for jobs or internships, if there's a way to show that you've been able to work real people into your stories, I think that is great. I mean, we all, you know, all too often we rely on you know, experts who may know the field really well, but they may not really be able to talk credibly about what it feels like to experience, you know, inflation, or to be evicted from your home, or you know, lose your job because they're, you know, they're living a different lifestyle. So I think the more that you could work real, you know, people into your stories, the more compelling that they'll be. And I think it's another way to stand out as from a, you know, an application standpoint as well.
Hey, Stacey, before you jump in, we just got a really good question from the group, from one of the students, and asking what's a piece of advice you wish you could give yourself when you first started out in journalism? I think Matt sort of just answered that by saying that, you know, working in what's happening to real people, to how this is impacting people, but keep that in mind. Stacey, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I do actually think what Matt was saying about a little more job security, that has been my experience too. Certainly when I started out in journalism, which was about 15 years ago now, there have been so many changes in the field, but I would say business journalism is, people always have a hunger in a bad time to understand what's going on, and in a good time to sort of take advantage of the moment to, you know, expand investments or buy a home or whatever it is. So I do think there is quite a bit of job security, and also just also just so many opportunities, and so many new and interesting ways to cover journalism. I mean, part of the difficulty of journalism right now is that it is changing so much, but that's also a really exciting thing. And I think one thing I would definitely like to convey is, when you're applying for an internship, you are bringing something so valuable to the organization, which is a knowledge of like how people are communicating now, stories that younger people are drawn to or interested in. Never underestimate how much value you're bringing and how much you know. I think that would be the piece of advice that I would give to myself, is trust your instincts, which sounds very cliche, but I do think if something seems interesting to you, or something seems like a story to you, or you're finding something boring, or you're finding something interesting, I would follow that instinct. I think those are very valuable instincts. And I think a lot of times newsrooms can get a little separated from the world that they cover. That can happen. It becomes a little echo chambery. And I think that's something that you're really bringing to the table when you apply for an internship. And I think you should, you know, not shy away from that. I think that's something to always remember, is that you're bringing something really special when you apply.
Aisha, round us out.
Yeah. So to answer the question about the piece of advice that I would give myself, I wish I would have learned more about Excel and spreadsheets and how to do that. I wish I would have learned or had more classes on business, in business in general, learn more about earnings and things like that. Eventually, I did learn all of that, right? Like some on my own and some through trainings and things like that they had at the job. But those are the things that I wish I would have known. And I think those are skills that I would apply regardless of whether you want to do business journalism or not. One of the things that I constantly think about is, you know, when I tell students, it's like, you know, business is not just markets and things like that, right? Think of like any topic and just put the business of in front of it. So the business of healthcare, the business of sports, the business of travel, the business, whatever it is. And all of a sudden, the angles, the type of stories you do may change a little bit, but it's still the same industry. You're just covering it in a different way. And anybody can do that at any point, whether it's the business of education. I mean, if you're in school, it's a business at the end of the day. So that's important just to keep in mind, regardless what you do. And then the other thing is that I would say, diversity is important. So think about the sources that you use. I mean, I often, like, even when I was at Newsday and I would do Mother's Day story or Valentine's Day story, like, anybody, right, could be interviewed for those kind of stories. But I made it a particular effort to make sure that I had different types of people in my story, because it's pretty easy to go to your comfort zone, but sometimes you got to expand out of your comfort zone. You know, sometimes I would go to meetings, honestly, that were all white, and I was the only person of color, sometimes the only woman. But I was used to that. And, you know, sometimes I would have other colleagues who were not used to that, unfortunately. They weren't used to being uncomfortable, to not having that, you know, being the odd man out in a place, you know? And so anyway, so it takes time and it takes practice, but I think it's something that is important to try to work on.
Awesome. Hey, Matt, I know you didn't quite get to throw in an official piece of advice. If you want to do one more.
Well, yeah, I would just elaborate on two great points that Aisha just made. One, I do wish I had I paid more attention to business and the market and the economy from a younger age. Like, I wish that I was paying more attention to that in college and right after college. So I think that would be one good piece of advice, because I think the more you're paying attention to it, which is it could just be reading business novels, it could be reading the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post business pages, like whatever it is, paying a lot of attention to it. I think it helps if you ultimately consider, you know, maybe going into business journalism, or even if not, because it's going to impact the political cycle as well, or the national news cycle. So, and the other one is also about getting out of your comfort zone. Sure, from a diversity standpoint, of course, but also from I think, like, just an experience standpoint. I mean, I think that there were times in my career where maybe I was a little too comfortable with whatever it was that I was covering or how I was covering it. And I think that you don't want to be too comfortable. I mean, on the one hand, it feels good to, you know, to feel like you have a handle on how your job is supposed to go. But I think you want to always be challenging yourself. So for me, like, writing comes naturally. Business writing didn't, but then it sort of did. And but like, going on camera wasn't something that came natural. So, you know, the piece of advice I would give myself would be to try that earlier.
Well, thank you all so much. And I would just say, from my perspective, I wish I knew more about these various journalism organizations. Obviously, we're here with SABU, the Business Journalism Organization. We've got a conference on Zoom coming up that you can network with more awesome people, like on this panel today. So I encourage you to check it out at sabu.org. But there's so many great orgs: NABJ, the National Association of Black Journalists; AAJA, the Asian American Journalists. There's IRE, if you're, which is the Investigative Reporting and Editing, I think is their acronym. So, you know, these are great opportunities. They really want to engage with students. They want to help college students. So I wish I had attended some of these conferences, and the fact that they're all on Zoom right now is like super easy. You don't even have to leave your dorm room. You can be part of this global network. So I wish I had known that. Thank you so much, Matt Egan from CNN, Aisha Al Muslim from the Wall Street Journal, and Stacey Vanek Smith from NPR. Thank you for your time and your great insights.
Thank you, Heather. It's wonderful to be here.